2021, and can I take this opportunity to wish you a much better 2021 than the 2020 that we've just had to endure and suffer. Present at this meeting are members of the Cabinet and a number of council officers. And can I remind everybody to turn their mobile phones to silent, and I refer you to the published protocols for holding virtual meetings, noting the following. Cabinet members must keep their videos on at all times, but put microphones on mute unless speaking. Other members and participants should switch off their videos and put microphones on mute until they are invited to speak. In the case of a technical problem, the meeting will adjourn until the issue is resolved. If the technical problem persists and the meeting is in quorum, the meeting will be adjourned and rearranged for a later date. And could you also note that this meeting is being audio and video recorded and will be available on the Council's website. Item 1 is apologies for absence. Apologies for absence have been received from Councillor Graham Henson, and in his absence as Deputy Leader, I will be chairing this meeting. That's Councillor Keith Ferry is I. I'd like to propose that item 8, COVID-19 update, be moved up the agenda and heard just after the public questions. Is that agreed? I don't see any dissension.
Yeah, agreed.
Good, thank you. Item 2, declarations of interest. The declaration of interest by members of the Cabinet have been published on the website and will be taken as read. Can I have any declarations from other members present in the virtual meeting? Paul.
I'm not sure because I think it might relate to a public question, and I suspect it's going to be about the Vaughan Road car park, at least in supplemental terms. If it is, I'll probably need to leave the meeting for that question, or the answer to that question, but I don't know at this stage, so just to get it out there. It's a pecuniary interest.
Right, okay, thank you very much. Item 3, petitions. I haven't been notified of any petitions. Are there any petitions from Cabinet members?
No.
No. All right. Are there any petitions from any other councillors present in the virtual meeting? No. Are there any petitions from members of the public? No. Okay, we move on to item 4, public questions. We've received 12 public questions and 15 minutes will be allowed for this item, though we'll see how we go on. We might extend that to a maximum of half an hour. As neither Councillor Henson nor Councillor Palmer are present for this item, I will answer questions addressed to the leader and Councillor Adam Swirsky will answer questions addressed to Councillor Varsha Palmer. And in order to maximise the time available, the public questions, which have been published on the council website, will be taken as read, and we will proceed directly to the answer and any supplementary question. Once this item is completed, members of the public will be asked to leave the virtual meeting, and if they do so, they can watch the remainder of the meeting live on the council's website. So if we could start with the question number 1 from Samantha Pally. The response is, we have received inquiries from Transport for London about low traffic neighbourhood in Harrow as a result of the question put to the London Mayor on the 16th of November. It was explained that the council has introduced a monthly review process to address issues and concerns and to take remedial actions as necessary. In the case of the Southfield Park low traffic neighbourhood, the closure has been removed temporarily pending further engagement with the local community. Samantha, do you have a supplementary question?
Councillor Ferry, it's Nikesh from Digital Services. Samantha Paddy's not actually on the call.
Okay, then we will move to question 2, which is from Ian Farr. And the response is, it is disappointing that some behaviour at the recent TARSAT panel was inappropriate, and members running the meeting will take steps in the future to ensure that participants conduct themselves in an appropriate manner to ensure that there is inclusive and respectful debate on this important issue. The public engagement portal is designed to encourage easy access and encourage feedback, and it is a successful model that has been used widely across the country. However, it is recognised that this can be monopolised by campaign groups, and so the Council is currently working on a follow-up engagement in the near future that will focus on the local community most directly affected by these measures. Ian, do you have a supplementary?
Thank you, Councillor Ferry, for that answer. That's helpful. I wondered if you could, today I read in the paper that TfL have lost a court case concerning taxis and street space schemes. I understand there's no impact immediately, but I wondered if the engagement on options on South Hesdon would potentially be delayed whilst sort of TfL sort out what's going on, if you see what I mean.
Thanks.
It might be, I'm sorry, and just saying, obviously it's only yesterday and you might not have had guidance yet, so I just wanted to raise it now if you had.
Well, we've had some guidance of sorts, and we haven't read the judgment in full. And as far as my understanding goes, this relates to the use of bus lanes by taxis in the Bishopsgate area. But I think also somewhere further on, it does mention that the judge thought that some of the measures that have been taken in the street space programme, which was rolled out by the government through TfL, may apply to wider low traffic neighbourhoods and other items that are in the street space. But as I say, I haven't had any legal guidance at all, and we have got officers that are looking at the judgment to see if it impacts on our street space. Is that fine? Good. Okay, let's move on to question number 3. And the response will come from Councillor Swirsky.
Thank you, Councillor Ferry. And the question is whether the consultations on the low traffic neighbourhoods will include an option for the total removal, and the response is yes.
Okay,
Thank you.
That's from Atish. Do you have a supplemental?
I do, Adam. So the residents have been over the last 4 to 5 months pumping loads of feedback into the street space portal, which you've asked us to. Now, we're doing a consultation. So are we saying all the time and effort that we've asked people to provide their feedback will now just be ignored? Because it seems like you've just done that, and now you're doing a consultation. So you want another opportunity to provide our feedback. So we're constantly providing feedback, but there is no action. So are we just saying all that was a waste of time?
Thanks, Atish. And it's a good point, because obviously we've had multiple ways that people could be back to us. So obviously the consultation, people have been writing in directly, coming along to the task up committee meetings. And really the idea of having that ongoing consultation is that we could respond as much as possible to live issues that are arising, whether that was, for example, early on there were some cars skating around on pavements, so we put in place some wooden bollards, responding to any of the teething issues that might come up. And then, of course, more recently, we had the feedback from the London Ambulance Service, and that's led us to make some very significant changes to the scheme. So we had a live feedback process. What we want to make sure that we do in this final consultation is make sure that all of the residents in the low traffic neighbourhood areas and those on just the immediate surrounding roads get their chance to respond. So we're actively writing to them, not just using online portal, but also using paper as well. And then using all of that information, we can come to the answer that corresponds to what residents want.
Cool. Thank you. My headphones just cut out. Did you say it's going to be to the people within the area and the surrounding roads?
Exactly.
Cool. Thank you.
Thanks, Atish.
Okay. I gather Samantha has come into the meeting. She probably didn't hear my response, but she has a supplemental question if you'd like to ask it, Samantha. You're still on mute.
Could I go off to the next person? Is that okay?
Yep. Okay.
Thank you.
We'll go on to question 4. Councillor Swirsky, could you provide an answer to Jeff Eldridge?
Yes, and the question is about the consultation and what the cost will be and how extensive it will be. And as I just mentioned to Atish, we are looking to consult with all the residents in the low traffic neighbourhood areas and also those on the immediate surrounding roads as well. We haven't completely finalised the scope of the consultation, and so we can't give you a final estimate on the costs. But obviously, those costs will be around the postage and printing and consultation materials.
Jeff, have you got a supplemental?
Yeah, there is actually. Can you hear me all right?
Yes.
Okay, I mean, could we have confirmation that should the consultation reject the need for low traffic neighbourhoods, then can we have reassurance that the roads will be returned back to the state they were before October, and that the debris and road blockages and subsequent alterations removed from the roads and put back as they were before? I mean, the roads at the moment look a mess, and we would like our roads back as they were should this consultation reject the low traffic neighbourhoods.
Jeff, we're really, really determined to do what residents want in the end, and the purpose of doing all this consultation is to work out what it is. So if people say what we want is to go back to exactly what it was before, we'll do our best to implement that. I think there will be I'm hoping there'll be some learning that we've got from the trial, whether that learning is, this was all a brilliant idea, or whether that learning is actually, we don't like most of it, but actually there's 1 or 2 things we did like about it, or there's 1 or 2, alternatives that we think are a good idea. So I think we absolutely will take the feedback, and people don't want the schemes, then we will remove them. But hopefully as part of the whole process, there's something we can learn and make improvements that everyone will agree with, or as many people as possible at least.
Okay.
Thank you very much. I'll come back to Samantha later on. Question 5 is from Heshma Shah and will be answered by Councillor Swirsky.
Thanks, Councillor Perry. So, the first point to make here is that we always intended to have a final consultation with residents, in addition to the ongoing consultation through the Streetspace website, to engaging with stakeholders as well. That's very, very much part of the plan, and I know that that's something that people have been very concerned about. And then the question was around, leaving people out who are outside of the boundaries of the schemes. And as I mentioned, we do want to make sure people who are on those boundary roads are included, so that we're taking their views into account as well.
Do you have a supplemental, Heshma?
I do actually. So over the past 4 months, we've heard from many people who are deeply unhappy that they were not able to comment on the LTN scheme. Harrow have made the assumption that every single adult resident uses the internet or has access to it. We've also heard that a lot of residents used to rely on libraries to use the internet, and now they're all closed. Given the limited reach of Streetspace file, as it's all internet based, how will you ensure that the whole community who are being impacted by the LTNs, including those who don't have access to the internet or are unable to use the internet as they don't know how to or cannot use it for health reasons, are also given a voice and the opportunity to comment? After all, Harrow should be looking after the interests of all its residents.
Yeah, thanks, Heshma. And that's exactly the reason why we want to do a letter out to the residents in the LTN areas and the surrounding roads. And obviously that letter will link to an online consultation for those who can use the internet and do want to respond that way, but there'll also be a paper response as well, because I think that is an important point.
Excellent, thank you.
Thanks, Heshma.
Thank you. If we move on to question 6, Adam, again, could you answer the question from Milep Galabi?
Absolutely, and this is about why we don't have other traffic calming measures instead of the low traffic neighbourhoods or instead of cameras. And what I'd say to that is that it's a very good point, and I think speed reduction is an important way to create livable neighbourhoods, and it's definitely part of the mix of interventions we've used in the past, we've used in some of these areas, and we'll continue to look at. I think what the low traffic neighbourhoods have been testing is whether we can deliver a dramatic reduction in car traffic in residential areas that gives that space to cyclists and pedestrians, reduces pollution and increases safety. What we recognise, and of course all the questions from the comments that have come back shows this, is that there's some very, very big trade-offs in that. And when we are considering the use of cameras and want to put that forward as part of the consultation, it's simply to say that's one of the ways in which we might be able to mitigate some of the trade-offs, particularly around the ability for residents in the low traffic neighbourhood areas to pass through those areas. So, people may not want that solution either, but I think it's an important one to potentially put forward so that people can say, well, if my main objection was that residents couldn't use the area, then that might help to address some of that. So I think it's just different tactics to solve different problems.
Okay, Mia, do you have a supplementary?
Yes, yesterday the High Court did rule that the introduction of the road closures by TfL street spaces was biased and was based on guidance that was seriously flawed. The judge did say it was possible to widen pavements or to allow for social distancing, which is something I've been asking for from the beginning. And one of the things that I just suggested in my question was, instead of using the APNR cameras, use speed cameras, because the problem we're having is with speeding traffic, not the fact that people are using the roads, because we residents have to use the roads. But I also said that the guidance from TfL should be substantially amended. If this is the case, when are you going to remove the barriers? Now it's confirmed that what we've been pointing out to you over the last 4 months.
Thanks, Mip. And it's as I say, it's a very good point that speeding is definitely one of the issues we're trying to address here. And there's a range of ways of addressing it, as you say. As Councillor Ferry said, obviously we're looking at the High Court judgment. It had a specific focus on taxis, but it may well apply to broader schemes. And obviously we have to take those considerations into account.
It's the taxis for people with disabilities, particularly, that have been very hard to hit, and you know that.
I appreciate that.
Okay. Thank you very much. Question 7. Adam, could you reply to Karen Jolliffe?
Yes, and this is about the quality impact assessment. So essentially, we did an quality impact assessment in July 2018 for the whole raft of infrastructure under the council's local transport plan. And that plan actually covers a whole set of the initiatives that are in the street space programme, because they fall within the overall policies and objectives of the plan. And that equality impact assessment is on the council website. Now, we did also develop specific equalities impact assessments for the low traffic neighbourhoods in October to look at those impacts, and they're currently being reviewed as well. And I think the specific document that's mentioned in the question came out of a freedom of information request, looking at one of the scheme-specific EQIAs, which were created more recently.
Okay. Did you have a supplementary, Karen?
Yes, I do. Also, I did ask, my first question was who signed off on the report and what date? But my supplementary is, why was a scheme which identified any discrimination actually progressed, which goes against the principles of the Discrimination Act?
So I think the key thing in any equalities impact assessment is not necessarily that every scheme has to have precisely equal impact, because it's just not possible. Then nothing would ever happen. What it is that what is important is that we take into account the differential impact. And it's really, really clear to us that on the one hand, these schemes favour people who are more likely to be pedestrians or obviously cyclists. But they disfavour people who use their car in the low traffic neighbourhoods. And so there will be a differential impact. That's absolutely part of the scheme. And the key for us is to make sure that when we weigh it up, that there are more benefits than costs. And that's something that we'll need to look at as part of the consultation. But I think, Karen, you're also right that we're likely to need a new look at the qualities impact assessments as part of any final decision as well.
Okay, thank you.
And who signed off on the date? You didn't answer my first question. Sorry.
So, in terms of the July 2018 report, that's a report that's been published. I don't know exactly who signed that off. In terms of the scheme-specific assessments, that would have been done through the team that's responsible for the street-based schemes in Harrow.
So you don't know?
Well, I'd say it's, there's only a very small team that's been part of that with obviously the portfolio holders. So that group would have been doing those impact assessments.
But you're confirming it's been signed then, yes?
Well, as I say, the scheme-specific quality impact assessments were undertaken for those low traffic neighbourhoods. So that's the information I have.
Okay then, thank you.
Okay, thanks, Karen.
Perhaps if we could go back to Samantha, who joined us after question 1 was read out. Do you have a supplementary, Samantha?
Yes, hi, thank you, Councillor Ferry. My question is supplementary. Residents were advised the outcome will be determined by the street spaces consultation, but it seems that because it's overwhelmingly against the scheme, that information is being discounted. If you believe in democracy, why is that happening? And will you give your word and commitment to removing the schemes if there is a 51% majority in any new consultations that's being done? Thank you.
I think that's already been covered by Adam, but I don't know if Adam wants to reiterate what he said before.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, I think we're absolutely determined that we are following what residents want, and the consultation is absolutely about making sure that we're taking that, we've got that data. So of course we'll go with what most people want. I think where the subtlety comes in is that, there is a bit of a binary choice here. Do we let cars pass? Do we let some cars pass? Or do we let no cars pass? That's clearly the sort of, there is a bit of a binary aspect to it. But then there's also, I think, the other question, which is, what are the range of, measures that we might put in place to accompany these schemes? What have we learned from them? What can we do to try and, make as many people as better off as possible through whatever we put in place? So I think we want to look at it from a rich perspective, but you're absolutely right that, in the end of the day, if most people want to remove the scheme, remove planters, remove the schemes, then we'll do that.
Are you confirming that if it's a 51% majority, they'll be removed immediately?
It feels just slightly hypothetical, but with the majority, we will go with what most people want. Samantha.
Okay, we'll move on to question 8 from Mike Williams. That was addressed to the leader. So the response is the Mayor's intend to publish version of the London plan included a tall buildings policy that will require local plans to define what is considered a tall building for specific localities, noting that the height of which will vary between and within different parts of London. It also required boroughs to determine where tall buildings may be an appropriate form of development and to identify these areas and heights on a map in local plans. The policy then outlined the matters that should be considered when assessing specific development proposals involving tall buildings. Given this, the Mayor's proposed London plan always intended that local communities, through their own local plans, would be able to identify where tall buildings should be built, having regard to their context and impact. The Secretary of State's direction simply requires that any local definition of a tall building should not be less than 6 stories or 18 metres. There is nothing in the direction from the Secretary of State that indicates that tall buildings in suburban areas outside town centres are by default inappropriate. Any applications for tall buildings within the borough will be assessed on their merits in accordance with the impact criteria outlined in the new London Plan Policy D9. It is noted that paragraph 3.9.3 of the plan indicates that where there is no local definition of a tall building, the policy applies to buildings over 6 stories or 18 metres. In this regard, the Council's core strategy defines a tall building in Harrow as any building at or over 30 metres high. Consequently, policy D9 does not immediately apply to any building below 30 metres in Harrow, but will be considered as part of the forthcoming local plan review. Do you have a supplementary?
Yes, I do, and thank you for that response. And my supplementary does reference the Vaughan Road car park, and I'm just picking up on what Councillor Osborne said at the head of the meeting. If anybody has a pecuniary interest, I should give you advance notice. That's what I will be asking about.
Thank you. I'm going to leave the meeting now, but can someone invite me back in when the answer has come? Thank you.
Sorry to be so direct on this, but Councillor Ferry, I believe you have an interest as well.
Well, we can't discuss any individual planning applications at a cabinet meeting. If it's a general question about planning, we can. But since you referred to one particular project, it will be inappropriate to answer that particular item.
Well, I think when you've heard the question, you may judge that it is possible to answer it. I was just aware Councillor Osborne seems to take a different interpretation than you. That was all. I'm just being cautious. My supplementary then is, in response to a public question at last night's planning meeting, the committee agreed to meet with representatives of the local community in West Harrow to fully understand their many and serious objections to the high-rise development proposed for Vaughan Road. They also agreed to a site visit. We understood that Councillor Shah was chair of the planning committee and that Councillor Ferry had resigned. But last night's meeting was chaired by Councillor Ali, and Councillor Ferry appeared to still be a member. Our genuine question is this: who is chair of the planning committee, and who should we be working with in order to set up the agreed meeting?
The answer to that is that you should always deal with officers of the council to set up any meeting and not correspond directly with councillors.
Well, in a democracy, it's quite nice to occasionally be able to communicate directly with councillors. Who is chair of the planning committee?
I've told you that you should contact the council officers. Beverly Kuchar is the head of development management, and she will arrange whatever she thinks is appropriate.
Is it a secret?
And the chair of the planning committee will be announced at the February council meeting.
Ah, I see. Okay, sorry. So it's not Councillor Shah.
It isn't Councillor Shah, no.
Okay, all right. You must understand the confusion is genuine.
I resigned at the December meeting because I have a conflict of interest in a position which I've taken up with the Harrow Strategic Development Partnership. Councillor Shah was supposed to take over, but he refused to do so. So the vice chair chaired last night's planning committee meeting, and a new chairman of the planning committee has to be appointed by council at its next meeting.
Okay, no, that's very clear. Thank you very much.
Thank you. All right. If we move on to question 9, Adam, could you answer the question from Karusha Thomas?
Yes, and the question's about the financial, the economic impact of COVID and the link to putting in low traffic neighbourhoods. And what I'd just say there is that a couple of things. And one is that, you know, as we know, we've spoken about before, the reason why these schemes were put in quickly was because the government, TfL, were very keen that if we did go down this route, then we did it as part of the pandemic response, because there was a recognition that people were going to struggle to use some public transport. It might put a lot of pressure on the roads. And if we can use the opportunity to make roads more welcoming for cyclists, pedestrians, then that could help a lot of people during the pandemic. So that was the rationale. People have very different views about that. But I think the pandemic has caused all these different consequences. And again, you know, the sort of interventions that we're putting in place are trying to balance them out and get the best impact for people. I mean, the one thing I would just add is that I don't think necessarily that, you know, putting restrictions in residential roads is going to have a negative economic impact on Harrow. I think that, you know, that there's plenty of opportunities for people to get around Harrow and to and actually sort of opens up streets in a way that could be beneficial as well. But I make the point that, you know, it's a very difficult time for people. We want to make sure that we're doing things that ultimately support resident well-being.
Karusha, do you have a supplementary?
Yes, I do. Thank you. Good evening, Councillor Sweski. How are you going to measure the economic impact of these LTNs on people from different socio-economic groups and ensure that those on middle to lower incomes are not disproportionately negatively affected by LTNs?
That's a good question, and I think, you know, links to the point about the qualities impact assessment, making sure that we are just taking into account the impact on lots of different groups. And in the end, we're going to hear back from the residents in those low traffic neighbourhood areas, hear back from people living just outside, and we can make a judgment then about, well, who seems to be most negatively affected, who seems to be positively affected, what can we do to mitigate the issues for people who, don't like it, what can we do to support the people who do like it. So your points are very well taken there. The economic, the impact on different socioeconomic groups, disabled people, all kinds of considerations here. It's a complex scheme. Like everything, we just have to come up with a balanced judgment that hopefully will please the maximum number of people.
Okay, thank you. Question 10, again for Adam. Could you answer the question from Sital Kotecha?
Yes, and the question, you've got your question here, which is obviously about the fact that there are very large petitions against the low traffic neighbourhood schemes, and asking why we haven't stopped them yet, and why we're looking at the use of cameras, which could be expensive. And what I just say is that the key thing is that we're still in the trial. It's only a 6-month trial, but all the evidence is that you've got to have a little bit of time in a trial to try and work through the different impacts and try and get people to have the full experience of what it's like, so people can then make an informed judgment. So we're not prejudging what the answer is, and like I've seen the same information that you have about the petitions, about the street space comments. I obviously know that there are people out there, there are many people who are unhappy with the schemes, and we're going to do this final consultation and get a final view. And if that's reflected ultimately in the final consultation with residents, then we'll need to go with what they want. I think we are putting the cameras out there as an option, not because we're saying it's necessarily the right answer, but because I think our job is to create options for residents. And one of the things people are worried about is that the schemes which are designed to stop roads being used as a cut through, also stopping residents from getting around their local area. And so the cameras are our way of seeing if there's a possibility, if they're seen as an option, to allow residents to pass through, but still stop the roads being used as a cut through. And that's why we want to put them on the table as an option, and ultimately see what people say in the consultation.
Okay, Sital, do you have a supplementary?
Yes, I do, Keith. Thanks for that, Adam. I mean, just to put things into perspective for a second, on the pro LTN02 petition, as of Monday, there were 35 signatures. There's been a significant increase this week to a grand total of 39 signatures. Okay, so that's just puts it into perspective. There's 5,500 signatures that are against LTNs, and you've got 39 signatures for the LTN. So that's just something I just wanted to put out there, just so you understand, the perspective here. Okay. So my supplementary question is: this week we saw traffic monitoring devices on Manor Way, Priory Way, and Southfield Park, and some of the surrounding roads. Now, given that we're in a full lockdown, the schools are shut, what insights do you think the council is going to get from this data? And do you not think this is just yet another example of the officers wasting the taxpayers' money?
So I think there's two points you made there. One is just on the petitions, and I think you won't surprise you. The politicians like doing popular things. So we see the petition numbers, we see what people write on the website. The issue for us is that what we don't know is the nuance of what people think about scheme, 1 in Southfield Park, scheme 2 in Bourne Road, scheme 3 in Ransford, all those different schemes. We need to just understand, what do residents in those areas think of them? We're going to write out to them, as we do with all the consultations that we do around traffic schemes, and we're going to ask them what they think, and we're going to ask people in the surrounding roads as well. So if the consultation comes back with similar answers to the petition numbers you've quoted, there won't be any discussion about this, and we'll go with that 100%. But I think it's right to do that consultation. You made a second point about I've now lost it. What was the second point again, Tom?
Well, the second point was the council has implemented traffic monitoring devices.
Yes.
Sorry. Given that we're in lockdown, given the schools are shut, what you going to learn from this data? Isn't this yet another example of the officers wasting?
Okay. Yeah, got it. No, got it. Thank you. Thanks for reminding me. So I think where I would agree with you is that it's never easy to interpret data from a relatively short period of time, and there's lots and lots of factors, and there are many experts on transport data who will sort of struggle to come up with the perfect answer on where to position a traffic light or what the right road layout is. So these are definitely hard questions. I think so that if we hadn't made any efforts to collect that data, we would have rightly come under quite a bit of criticism for not trying our best to understand the impact in the circumstances. So in the last few months, I've had many emails from people saying, what data are you collecting? Why aren't you collecting more data? So I think again, it comes to that balance. I don't think we've spent huge amounts of money on.
Adam, don't you think you need to be a little bit more educated? I mean, given that the resources are already stretched with the council, where you're cutting. I mean, you're in charge.
Situl, you've already had one. You've already had one supplemental question.
No, but he hasn't answered my question.
Well, Situl,
you're in charge of finance. Given how strict the finances are, I mean, you are not going to learn anything from this data. It means nothing. The schools are shut. You're not going to learn. The data is going to be irrelevant.
What I'd say is I'm absolutely taking your point, and I understand your view on this. I think there are other people who would say we need to be collecting as much data as possible to come with the best information. I think that's probably. I think that's probably the answer.
We're now going to move on to question number 11 from Natalie Tober. Again, that's for Adam, and if you could be fairly brief with this one because we're nearly coming up to half an hour.
Oh, sorry. Yes. So, Natalie, thank you for your question, which is about the challenges you've faced given arthritis, to have extended journeys in the car. And I'd say, Natalie, I'm really sorry to hear about the difficulties you face. And obviously, while the LTN schemes don't prevent people from using their cars, but I totally accept they create diversions and they make journeys longer. And that's absolutely the trade-offs with the scheme that we're trying to balance here. The trade-off between the reduction in air and noise pollution and the safety for pedestrians and cyclists. On the other hand, the challenges that they create for motorists. And I understand that those are important. Those are really important considerations. And what I'd say is that, as part of the final consultation, we're going to put forward that full range of options and really let residents help us to decide where to strike that balance. And as I say, that will include options around using cameras, which will help residents like yourself to pass through those low traffic neighbourhood areas.
Okay, Natalie, do you have a supplementary?
Yes, I do. Thank you. Adam, I'm a pensioner, and how many people are there like me who are in pain but not disabled enough to get a blue badge, but still need to go shopping, go to the doctor and go to the physio for help? Exactly how many vulnerable people like this are affected negatively by the LTN who were not considered?
And Natalie, again, I think this speaks to just the importance of that, and that making sure that we've assessed all the equalities impacts of the low traffic neighbourhoods. They do have a differential impact. There are benefits for some groups of people. I think those groups will also include a range of people with disabled people with children, people in all kinds of conditions, but they also have negative impacts for other people. When you're making a big change like that, you're going to see those impacts, and I completely understand the challenges of people who are negatively affected, and we just have to see with the consultation the full balance and make sure that we're taking into account the views of residents and also the equalities impacts that come from that as well.
And will the equalities impact look at disabled people and pregnant people and others?
Equalities impacts will always look at the full range of what we call protected characteristics, which absolutely includes disability, and I believe pregnancy as well, certainly gender and other protected characteristics.
Well, some protected aspects don't have problems of fitness or health, so I think we need to be subtle about this.
That's a good point. I Keith, I think you're on mute.
Sorry for that.
All right.
Okay, we're going to move on to question 12. And it's a question about our excellent Headstone South councillors. And the answer is that councillors are elected for a 4-year term and remain in post unless they decide to resign. The petition you refer to was received, but all 3 Headstone South councillors have decided to remain in post until the elections in May 2022. And so that is the end of the matter so far as the council is concerned. Vishal, do you have a supplementary? And you're on mute now.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. Brilliant. Good evening. Right. So the question I had has actually been asked by someone else. So I will still ask a question. It's obvious the way people feel about how these LTNs have been imposed. The negative impact it's had on most people. The grievances people have had with these LTNs. Can I ask what lessons, if any, have the councillors learned so far?
I think the one lesson we've learned is not to follow the government's advice when they tell us to put these things in without consultation and in a very short space of time.
But the government then forces to for you to implement this. Is it just not a case that we just followed the money and went ahead because the money was on offer?
No, we were required through the government regulations to install these low traffic neighbourhoods and street space schemes, and we were told that if we hadn't done it by the date in September, then we would have to pay for it out of your taxpayers' money, and we would still have to go ahead with it. So that's why it wasn't because there was money on offer on the table. It's because the street space scheme, as you will realise, has been implemented throughout London, and this is not a Harrow initiative. Anyway,
most people didn't want the LTN, so it wouldn't have been a question.
We've had a lot of discussion about LTNs tonight. I've just outlined the position that the council was put in. That if we hadn't have introduced these things within the government's timeline, then we would have had to still put them in, but have to pay for them out.
Yeah, we would have had a proper consultation then and decided what the best means were. But
I'll go back to the first thing I said. We won't be forced down this path by the government again. Okay. Right. If we can move now on to item 8, which is the COVID-19 update. I'd like to introduce our Chief Executive, Sean Harris.
Thank you, Keith. Could the Democratic Services IT colleagues put the presentation up, please?
And can also the Democratic Services, if I can ask members to move on to the public website and leave the meeting at this stage.
I'm just waiting for the presentation to come up, Chair. It won't be a second. Thank you, Chair. What you have in your pack and information which has been sent to all councillors, which is therefore available in the public domain, are actually 2 presentations. There's a short summary presentation from myself, which I will go through as part of the meeting. And then there is a much more detailed presentation which has been prepared by Carol Furlong, the Director of Public Health, which sets out in a lot more detail the specifics of the impact of COVID, what we're doing around testing, and a significant amount of detail on the vaccination programme. So I think it is very helpful both for members of the Cabinet, but also members of the public in Harrow and partners to be able to see the breadth and depth of the response to COVID, which is clearly the most significant and challenging issue that's facing the country and Harrow Council at this particular point in time. So just in terms of the points that we're going to cover this evening at the Cabinet, share with you where we're up to in terms of COVID overall, explain what the implications are of the national lockdown and the outlook for the future, go into a bit more detail about the aspects of the Council's response, both in respect of the management of our services, the specifics of the COVID-related activity, and the broader impact on Harrow overall. Going to spend some time just sharing, and there's much more detail in Carol's presentation, on where we're up to in terms of the rollout of the vaccination programme, which is clearly incredibly important to help guide us out of the crisis that we're in at the moment, and also to give the Cabinet an overview of the overall position in relation to the Council in respect of priorities and capacity. So, Chair, it's clearly only a month since the last Cabinet meeting, which I think was on the 17th or 18th of December. At that point, London was still in Tier 3. But as obviously we experienced, there was an extremely rapid rise in cases in December, which initially led to London and many other parts of the country moving into Tier 4, which was then quickly followed by a national lockdown which took place from the beginning of January. And if you track back the history of cases and the numbers which are shown in more detail in Carol's presentation, you will see that Harrow almost reached 1,000 cases per 100,000 people, which is a huge concentration and spread of coronavirus in the borough. And this was replicated across much of London and the South East, leading to, the most challenging aspects of the pandemic that we've seen right until the very early days. You will see that in London and in Harrow, the cases have come down proportionally quite a lot in the last couple of weeks, but this rate of over 700 cases per 100,000 is still a massive level of coronavirus in the borough, and means that there are going to be ongoing challenges for many weeks and probably months to come in terms of the Council's response to COVID. People will also be aware that hospital admissions and bed occupancy across hospitals in the UK are at a record level. Because there's a lag between case levels and hospitalisation, that is still rising at the moment, and it is causing a major cause for concern. Staff within the NHS and the Council were working round the clock, including over the Christmas and New Year period, to deal with the pressures in our local hospitals, and the Council being involved in supporting much of the work to the plan, the discharge and care for people post-COVID. As I've said, there are some early signs that lockdown is gradually reducing cases, and that is something which is clearly to be welcomed. This presentation sets out in summary form some of those key issues, what the overall case level is, what the position is for people aged over 60, how much testing is taking place in Harrow, and what the positivity rate is. And at one point, 1 in every 4 people that were being tested in Harrow were coming back as positive. Situation is slightly better now, and it is 1 in 5 people. But nevertheless, I think it is really important to say that, coronavirus in Harrow is still very widespread, and that we all need to act as if we have the virus and be very vigilant and follow all of the regulations that we can, in order that we continue to drive down the chain of infection, and that we manage a very difficult and challenging situation. So, just to pick up a number of key issues, we know that much of the increase before and after Christmas was driven by the new variant. That led to a massive and rapid increase in the number of cases, and also that led to the national lockdown. We know at the moment that there is a review of the current lockdown arrangements in the middle of February. You may have seen already that the Prime Minister today said that it's too early to say what will happen. I think most people anticipate that there will probably continue to be some pretty stringent restrictions in place well into March and possibly later, given the high levels of cases that exist, the need to roll the vaccine programme out, and the virulence of the new variant. So it's important that in planning terms that we will continue to see coronavirus dominating the work of the council and the impact on Harrow for many weeks and probably many months to come. As a result of all the additional pressures around coronavirus, the work that the council has been asked to do has continued to increase and be broader, and obviously, as well as being asked to deliver a number of additional services, the council is also wrestling with, as our staff are, dealing with the delivery of the many hundreds of services that the council provides in an environment of lockdown, with many staff working at home and homeschooling. And I do think it is important to say that partly because of the numbers of people in the workforce with COVID, number of people self-isolating, the very, very high levels of work that are required both to run services and to respond to coronavirus, and the amount of time that staff have been working at a very, very high level over the pandemic over the last 10 months. It's certainly the case that resilience and capacity is more stretched than at any point over the period of the pandemic, and we know that we have to continue to manage that for several more months to come. So it's a very, very big focus of mine and the council's officer leadership team about how we're going to maintain that level of activity and prioritise our work so that we can deal with this huge and ongoing challenge. So just in terms of the aspects of the work that we have responded to, we were asked both by national government and by London to put in place a detailed number of measures in response to the rapid increase in coronavirus. There's a lot more detail in Carol's presentation, but for example, there has been a very detailed focus around enforcement. We are literally doing hundreds of visits to businesses and providing help and support and advice. We have employed around 40 additional members of staff to work as COVID marshals and advisors in order to be able to support activity, and generally working with colleagues in the police and in businesses in order to be able to get the message across and ensure that the regulations are followed as effectively as we can in order to break that chain of infection. We've also been asked to bring in across the borough at a very high level capacity so that people who don't have symptoms can get tested in order to be able to be identified so that they can themselves self-isolate and break that chain of infection. For example, there were almost 250 people last week who went through the asymptomatic testing sites who came back as positive. Those people can now take themselves out of circulation, which means that there are that number of people not potentially spreading coronavirus to others. And very, very keen to push and promote, particularly key workers, getting regular lateral flow tests. And if people want to book a test, all they need to do is go on the website at www.harrow.gov.uk/test, and you can book at a number of locations across the borough a test. And obviously there is a massive communications and engagement process in order to be able to help, support and advise local people both to understand the regulations, but also to take the right action if they have symptoms and or they are a key worker and need a regular test. And the council only this week did another detailed webinar with a high number of local community, religious and voluntary and community sector leaders in order to be able to spread the messages that will help us all stay safe and help us move out of the particular crisis that we're in at the moment over the following weeks. Similarly, as I've said previously, colleagues in adult social care and children's social care who have been under very high levels of pressure and increasing demand have been working extensively with the NHS on supporting hospital discharge and ensuring that adult social care is in place for vulnerable residents. We've also been working extensively with schools to ensure that they are in place, although schools are closed to most pupils or people are doing online learning, ensure that they are continue to be available for key workers and vulnerable children. The economic impact of coronavirus is very significant, and the council is currently administering 10 separate grants to support businesses in Harrow, which is a very important lifeline for them, and also being incredibly involved with the infrastructure and logistics to support the NHS in the rollout of the primary care network and mass vaccination sites across the borough. And then, as I've said previously, ensuring that our services, whether they're universal, targeted or specialist, continue to operate given the impact of coronavirus and lockdown. Just also want to spend just a short period of time, Chair, just giving the Cabinet an update in terms of vaccination. Again, there's much more detail in Carol's presentation about all aspects of the vaccination programme and also on the vaccine itself. We have got 3 primary care network sites up and running in Harrow now. They're beginning to vaccinate a significant number of people, and across North West London, Harrow is performing very well in terms of vaccine rollout. Clearly, as we know that it's in relatively early days and the pace of the rollout will be subject to the amount of vaccine that is available. The amount of vaccine is increasing week by week, so the pace and scale of the rollout will increase, particularly during February. Pleased to say that care home vaccination is ongoing and on target for completion in the next few days. I'm also very pleased to say that social care staff have begun to be vaccinated this week, which is very positive. And also vaccination is starting across North West London imminently for those who are unable to leave home, and that means that they also will be vaccinated, and that the mass vaccination site, which will be built in addition to the primary care network site at Byron Hall, it will go live probably in the middle of February, which again will see this being ramped up significantly. And as we know, as well as ensuring that we get the numbers vaccinated, we need to make sure that we work very, very detailed to ensure that those groups and communities who are more reluctant to be vaccinated, we are able to do so. And I'm pleased to say that we were invited to bid for a government fund in order to be able to promote the importance of testing and vaccination, and I'm pleased to say that the council was awarded just under £500,000 this week from that particular fund, and much of that will be spent through and with local voluntary organisations, local faith groups, etc., in order to be able to promote the rollout of the vaccine and promote testing, which will be really, really important to make sure that we reach all communities in Harrow and we maximise the efficacy of the vaccine as it's rolled out over the next few weeks. Finally, Chair, just to say that we know that the situation relating to COVID deteriorated rapidly in December, which has led to the national lockdown that we're now in. It is good that it would appear that certainly in terms of case numbers, the lockdown is beginning to have an impact. But I think it's fair to say that given where we started, tough restrictions will probably continue for a fairly significant amount of time. And certainly the NHS are planning to have significant pressures well into the spring. I've set out that the council has been asked to do a wide range of further and additional tasks relating to enforcement, testing, communications and supporting the rollout of the vaccination. And that I also mentioned as well is that organisational and staff resilience and capacity has been tested significantly and will continue to be tested significantly, given the length and intensity of the emergency, which clearly is limiting activity that the council can play across a number of areas. But the thing I want to end on is that if we support and push the key public health messages around hands, face, space and compliance with the regulations, and we support the rollout of the vaccinations, hopefully in the weeks and months to come, we will see ourselves being in a position where we can return to a degree of normality, hopefully at some point between the spring and the summer. And the final thing I'd want to say, Chair, as well, as I have done in all of my previous presentations to the Cabinet in relation to the work, is just to thank the council staff at all levels, across all services, and our partners, particularly, for example, in schools and within the NHS, done a fantastic job at keeping local people safe in a very difficult and challenging period. So thank you, Chair.
Was Carol going to follow on from you?
No, Chair, I think that Carol is available to ask questions. We just thought it was very important that Carol's more detailed presentation was available both for the Cabinet and the public. I don't know whether Carol wishes to say anything in particular.
Thanks, Sean. Thanks, Keith. I don't have anything to add. You know, I think it's we are seeing a little light at the end of the tunnel, but it's a long way off before we'll be out in bright sunshine. So I think, you know, thank you to the people of Harrow for adhering to the lockdown, for getting tested, and for going for vaccination. You know, I think that it's something that they can all be really proud of.
Good. Okay, thank you, Carol. I'd also like to echo the words of Sean in relaying all councillors' thanks to the staff that have been working tremendously hard over the last 12 months on this. We are a very, and have been judged by our peers to be a very efficient council, so we don't have lots of people sitting around doing nothing. We're also not exempt from getting this virus ourselves, and we have had quite a few staff that have succumbed to this this COVID disease. And of course, over the last 12 months, we've been trying as best we can to cope with the extra demands that have been put upon us, not least the demands that have been put on our benefits and section in paying out grants to businesses and what have you. So we've actually, over the last year, I think achieved a lot more than we could have possibly thought we could have achieved with less resources than we had. And I'd also like to apologise to any members of the public that are listening. If their services haven't been up to the high standards we try to attain to, then please bear with us, because we are working extremely hard and there are lots of people are almost at breaking point. So anyway, thank you. Paul, you've got a question?
Yeah, thank you. Can I start by thanking the Chief Executive for that presentation and also for the regular briefings that I get. I'd also like to take this opportunity just to pass on my good wishes to Councillor Henson. I know a lot of our group are thinking about him and hoping he has a speedy recovery. I think it is a sobering time. I am, though, relieved to see that the vaccine rollout is going well and well in Harrow. I'd like to also pay tribute to the officers for getting the lateral flow testing sites up and running. I know that was done over Christmas and New Year and over a very difficult time and was done very quickly. And I think, you know, it's important to make that and to say that and to pay tribute to staff for all they do. That said, I'd like to ask a question to Councillor Swirsky, if I may, on one thing, because one of the things that's obviously apparent is the pressure on the NHS and the pressure on the ambulance service as well. And it's been brought to my attention that within the last week, the London Ambulance Service have once again reiterated their opposition to having LTN schemes that don't have 3.5 metre access. And they've also drawn the council's attention to a specific example of one of the barriers that's still in place and still doesn't allow ambulance access to a particular road. And yet the council still hasn't removed those remaining barriers to enable a 3.5 metre emergency access to the whole of Harrow. I would really ask him now to undertake that tomorrow officers get these barriers open so that we are not delaying ambulances on their way with the incredibly high call rate that we're seeing on their way to emergency emergency calls to be delayed. Thank you.
Well, Paul, just to come back on that, I mean, we received feedback before Christmas about specific incidents, specific concerns that London Ambulance Service had. We reacted very, very quickly to make changes to the schemes, as you know, to many of the schemes, not to all of them, because we were targeting the ones where we felt the concerns were strongest. Had further feedback, and we'll take action very swiftly as a result of that. So we are as concerned as he is about the pressures on the ambulance service, and as concerned that we are responsive to their feedback as well.
I would just say it really should be tomorrow. I don't think we can wait for some tragedy to happen. And the other thing I would just say, and I would say it in a genuine spirit, officers talk, and I think rightly, about the capacity issues that they have. One of the ways, at least the Environment Department, to relieve some of that problem and some of those capacity issues is to get rid of these LTNs and not be doing them now. If we're doing them now, we are taking time away from other things that could be done for COVID more urgently. And these LTNs can be looked at once we get past this pandemic, rather than trying to do these things and then complaining that we don't have capacity.
And just, I mean, maybe just very briefly on that point, and again, Paul, this is not meant as a political point at all, but it was the government's view that these were important interventions during the pandemic. It wasn't a coincidence that we put these in place in the pandemic. And again, it's not a political point, it's just a point that there clearly, there was clearly a view taken by people who've got, huge amounts of expertise around transport policy, that these could be really important measures in the pandemic. So that's why we did them, along with many other councils, at this point. We didn't sit up and think suddenly, it would be a great idea to do in the middle of the pandemic is a whole set of street-space schemes. It was part of the overall government response, and we played our role in that. And we're going to see the trial through to its very near conclusion.
Yeah, Paul, as regard your first question, you've got several officers listening in on this conversation, and I hope that they will take up your concerns tomorrow morning and get back to you with an answer. Okay, I can't see any other golden hands in the air, so can we note the presentation?
Noted.
Yes. Good, excellent. Thank you very much.
Noted.
We move on to item 5, which is councillor questions. So to kick off, would Councillor Ashton like to ask her question?
Yes, thank you. Good evening, Deputy Leader. Spoke last night at planning as well. The first question was to Graham Henson. I do hope better soon. It's, do you think that this administration listens to people and takes seriously their concerns?
Yes, and it's nice to see you again, Marilyn, after such a long time. As you know, this administration believes in carrying out good quality consultation and engagement with all of our residents. And although there are sometimes exceptions to this, I believe that we have a very good track record of doing this well. So in direct answer to your question, I think that this administration listens to people and seriously takes in their concerns. And I'd also pay thanks to Councillor Sue Anderson, who does an excellent job as her portfolio covers public consultations. Do you have a supplementary?
Yes, please. Thank you very much. I'm not quite sure how you can say that, or indeed how Councillor Swirsky can say that the council is listening to people on the LTNs, and this administration really has failed to inform people about the space schemes. It's failed to listen to people. It's failed to brief all councillors.
it's decided to ignore the ambulance service when, in actual fact, they've been very clear that any kind of hard barrier that completely close the road should be removed immediately, because they could involve a problem. They feel very strongly about it, and yet as we sit here tonight with this administration knowing that these barriers are still in place, and also people, and this is way before COVID, are being ignored on all sorts of problems, bins, parking problems, the planning portal isn't fit for purpose.
Is this leading to a question somewhere?
Yeah. Yes, of course it's leading to a question, Deputy Leader. And so, with all due respect, can you honestly say, having heard what I've just said, and having listened to all of the people that have turned up tonight and made deputations, and at the TARSAC meetings, and frankly, the thousands of people that have objected to the LTNs and planning applications and all sorts of things, can you honestly say, with a straight face, that this administration seriously listens to people?
Yes, I can. And I'll go back to saying before, we've, I think for the first time in Harrow's history, we've had a portfolio holder who is in charge of public consultations. And as you well know, if we weren't doing what we should do on public consultations, then Councillor Anderson will be on our back. And I think we've got a very good record of consulting people as much as we can. So would you like to ask your second question?
Yes, oh dear, we really are in denial. This was also for Councillor Henson. Do you believe your regeneration plans contain enough flexibility to be adaptable to the post-COVID world?
Thank you. The council-wide regeneration programme is predominantly housing based, and this will be in continued need and demand in a post-COVID world. The Harrow Strategic Development Partnership is set up to be a flexible and responsive vehicle which will enable the council and its preferred partners to respond to the challenges of the market and the environment. The council's developing thinking on its own accommodation takes into account the effects of COVID, as well as the council's long-term ambitions for flexibility and high quality workspace. And also I would point out that we believe when we're planning the new new civic centre, that this will not be the end of the pandemics. There will be other pandemics coming along, and we will have to ensure that the new civic centre is compliant in all respects for COVID-19 and anything that we could likely get in the future. Do you have a supplementary?
Yes, I do. Thank you very much. You see, the problem is, at the last cabinet meeting, Graham Henson, the leader of the council, to be fair, not your good self, Keith, implied to me that the council was contractually locked in when it came to the council's regeneration plans and the proposed moving of the civic centre to Peel Road. And I have since been told by your senior officers, and indeed our development partners, Wait, in another meeting, that this is definitely not the case. So can you confirm who is correct? Is it the leader of the council, Councillor Henson, who clearly answered in that way, or is it your officers and our development partner?
Well, the answer is that we took a decision at Cabinet 3 years ago that the new civic centre would be on the Peel Road site, and that is still an extant decision of the Cabinet. I can't comment on anything you might have heard from other officers or from other sources whatsoever, but it is still the opinion, and it was the opinion of the three bidders as I understand it, although I wasn't involved in the procurement process. All three bidders for the strategic partnership were of the same opinion that Peel Road was the best site for the Harrow New Civic Centre. And just to underline, I can say that since 3 years ago, when it was decided by Cabinet that that was the site, we have been unwavering in our support for that site as our new civic centre base.
Yes, but the question was, were you locked in? Yes or no? Who's right? Please answer the question. I'm sorry.
Was I thought I had answered the question.
No, you haven't. Because I was told at the last meeting, please forgive me, I don't want to be disrespectful, but I do want to get an answer. It's not unreasonable. Councillor Henson said that we couldn't change if we wanted to. Say next year we take control and we intend to, and we don't want to move to Peel Road. Are we locked in? He said yes. Apparently that's not right. Who's right? Him or the officers?
Well, the reason he said that was because Cabinet took a decision, and until Cabinet reverses that decision, we are locked into it. So anyway, can we go on to Councillor Patel, please?
Oh dear.
Yes, thank you, Councillor Ferry, Deputy Leader. My question was actually to Councillor Varsha Parma, Portfolio Holder for Environment. But if she is not there, I would prefer you, Councillor Ferry, to answer the question, please, if you don't mind.
Councillor Swirsky has got a response.
Oh, what a shame. Anyway, how important are views and concerns of residents and businesses in reviewing your street space schemes? I just say that, Councillor Swirsky, because I know how the consultation is going in my ward, West Harrow, you know, with you and the LTN. So I'm sorry, I didn't have that much confidence in you. So I wanted Councillor Ferry to answer my question, but here you go. Go on.
Right,
Patel, I thought your ward was Belmont, but
oh, you've forgotten. I'm a West Harrow resident.
I would never forget you're one of our residents. I just thought you were here to represent your residents here tonight, Councillor Patel, but clearly you're here representing yourself as a resident. Of course, to answer your question, consultation is extremely important to us, which is why we've had the street space website running the entire time, which is why we've got monthly reviews, we've got public task out meetings that have been very well attended, and of course we're also planning a formal consultation, full formal consultation, before any final decisions made. So consultation is and always has been, as Councillor Ferry said, with respect to the fact that we have a cabinet member responsible for consultation, very, very important to us.
You've got a supplementary.
Yes, I do. Thank you. In your previous reviews of your street space schemes, you have largely focused on the roads directly affected by them. It is becoming increasingly clear that these schemes are not only causing major consequences for the streets nearby the schemes, but they are also affecting Harrow as a whole. Will you commit to a real, meaningful review which would consider the views of the entire borough, who are all being affected by these schemes?
I'll definitely commit to a real, meaningful review with consulting all the residents in the low traffic neighbourhood areas and on the surrounding roads.
Okay.
Right, you've got your next question.
Yes. Do you still believe that your street space schemes deliver on the original intended goals?
We're very close to monitoring the schemes. We're seeing some evidence around increased walking and cycling, but as we just talked about in the public questions, it is really hard to draw definitive conclusions from relatively small amount of data. What we want to do is take the data we've collected, as well as the full weight of consultation that we have done and will do before we make the final decisions. And that will tell whether residents ultimately feel that their streets have, become less polluted, or whether they've become safer for, cycling, walking. And if they feel so, then, we can keep reverting the schemes in place. And if they don't feel so, then we'll remove them.
That is not true. Actually, we've heard so many, more than 12 residents who's already told you their views about how unhappy they are about this roadblocks, and you're still not listening to the residents, which is a great shame. And I would also say that what Councillor Ferry said about government forcing them to do, it is not true. Harrow Council has actually done it on their own. Nobody has been forced to do these LTNs, but they obviously wanted the money and they have done it. So this is absolutely not true, what you have said, Councillor Ferry. And Hillingdon Council didn't do any LTNs, so it isn't true what you just told the residents, Mr. Shah, which was not correct. My supplementary question is, since these schemes were first implemented, you've had to make a number of embarrassing changes. These schemes are starting to resemble Frankenstein monster, where you have made so many alterations. I am not complaining that you finally saw the sense and mitigated several demanding aspects of these schemes, but surely we have come to the point where these schemes bear no resemblance to their initial purpose and have lost any legitimacy they ever had. So do you think it is time to call it a day and remove them? And I also would like to emphasize that the roadblocks which are still there should be removed immediately tomorrow. And as we have heard from the chief executive that we are actually having problems with the resources, why don't you just scrap this scheme and free the people to do other things which are more important than causing real problems to the residents, and they don't want this scheme. And it will be really good for everyone. Thank you.
I mean, I think there's really, there's a key point that I want to make really, which is when I hear some of the language you use around the low traffic neighbourhoods, it's as if it was a ridiculous idea that it sort of came from Mars and we've just decided to sort of impose on the residents of Harrow. Whereas what's actually happened is that low traffic neighbourhoods have been tested in a number of London boroughs in the past. They're very well established in some locations. And as a result of those early successes, the government has announced a policy in favour of this type of scheme. And what we decided to do in Harrow is you're right, we did decide to take advantage of the funding that was made available and the guidance that suggested that we try these schemes. But ultimately, we decided to do a trial. And the whole point of the trial is to see, does it work here? Does it work in Harrow? Do people like it or not? Let's get the feedback. Let's get the experience from it. And then let's get the best solution and learn from it. And that's exactly what we're trying to do. So when you talk about the embarrassing changes we've made, if we weren't making changes in a trial, I think that it would be completely wrong. It would show that we aren't listening. The fact that we are making changes shows we're absolutely listening. And at the end of the trial, which is coming up in just a few weeks' time, then we'll be able to take a really full and comprehensive and well-informed assessment of what the future should be. And that's what we've tried to do the whole way through.
Right. We'll move on to the last question from Councillor Richard Almond, which I will answer.
Thank you. What are the exceptional circumstances justifying keeping open places of worship, of which that was Councillor Henson, have written to community leaders?
Thank you, Richard. Nice to see you. As you will appreciate, this was a message that the leader sent out, but ultimately all of our community communications during this pandemic have been about keeping Harrow and our residents safe. We want people to think about their safety and the safety of others in all of their actions. Exceptional circumstances in this instance, is there a prompt to make people think about whether they should or shouldn't do something, regardless of whether the current regulations may allow them to do so. In all of the Cabinet are extremely grateful for the work that our faith leaders have undertaken to protect their congregations, both in this current lockdown and through the pandemic. Many have gone beyond the government advice around communal prayer during this current lockdown, and they have done this because they believe it is the right thing to do in order to save lives. They have our full support in doing so, and their response is a testament to the fantastic diversity and cohesion of Harrow in pulling together during these difficult times. And I'm sure we're all concerned about our own health and the health of our families and our loved ones, and by people trying to find loopholes in the regulations that have been laid out by government in order to get round these things, they're not doing any of their relatives or themselves any good. Do you have a supplementary?
I hope you're not implying in that answer that places of worship which have stayed open for public communal worship are looking for loopholes. They're staying perfectly well within the regulations and the law. The advice in Councillor Henson's letter, which was written the day this current lockdown started, was strongly advised places of worship only open in exceptional circumstances. That gave rise to this question directly. The government, when it decided on the lockdown, had the advice of Public Health England, which is that places of worship had, by the extraordinary measures they put in place, made themselves safe for the public. A week into the lockdown, the government's COVID task force reinforced that view and said specifically that places of worship by opening for communal worship, we're not placing burdens on the NHS. Isn't it important that when the leader of the council or any other member of the administration gives what purports to be COVID safety advice, he knows his facts? Because if he did know the facts in this case, his advice did not reflect them.
Well, I think it's a matter of degree, isn't it? It's a case that we can't carry on with our normal religious services in packed churches, mosques, temples and what have you, and synagogues, because that will be completely against the regulations and against anything that public health will come out with. I do take on board the fact that some places of worship have to remain open in order to serve people's mental health during this, and some people feel that they are uplifted by going to their places of worship. What the leader was saying was that even though Public Health England have said that the places should stay open for worship, everybody should look at that and do a risk assessment on the type of worship that they could offer, and only in exceptional circumstances should they depart from that risk assessment. Okay, that finishes the councillors' questions, so we move on to item 6, which is the key decision schedule, January to March 2021. And can I ask you to note that the commissioning of Harrow Paediatric Services has been deferred from January to the February Cabinet meeting, obviously, because we're in the January Cabinet meeting. And in addition, can members please note that the key decision on the Department for Work and Pensions DWP contract kickstart funding was not included on the key decision schedule, but has been included in the agenda for tonight's meeting on the grounds of urgency. And I'll explain what the grounds of urgency were when I come to introduce that later on. And can the Cabinet note the key decision schedules on pages 11 to 28?
Okay. Noted.
Good. Thank you very much. And item 7, can the Cabinet note the update on the progress on scrutiny projects on pages 29 and 30?
Noted.
Good. Right, so we move on to the borough-wide public spaces protection order to address environmental issues, and Councillor Palmer is with us, I believe, now. Welcome, Councillor Palmer. Would you like to introduce the report?
Yes, thank you. This is the first of the 3 reports that I'm introducing today. So we're proposing to renew the borough-wide public spaces protection order as created under the Antisocial Behaviour Crime and Policing Act of 2014. And this is to address specific matters to do with harassment, nuisance, etc., that can affect the borough. So what we're asking is to consider and approve the PSPO, and it does help us to allow us direct action against low-level anti-social behaviours, and also to issue fixed penalty notices for breaches as necessary. Now we had them in we had the PSPO in June 17, and we used it in various controls to help us, which was for spitting, smoking in play areas, drinking in public areas, etc. And they have proved to be quite helpful and useful. Now the PSPOs last about 3 years, so this is up for renewal, and that's why we're here. And we do monitor them. So basically, it's a renewal. So that's all I want to say at this moment.
Okay. Does anybody have any questions? I can see Paul's got his hand up.
Yeah, thank you very much, Deputy Leader. I'm just curious. Is Councillor Palmer still in charge of the traffic part of the Environment Department? I mean, I assume she wasn't answering questions because she wasn't here. Given that she's here, I don't understand why she's not answering questions for her area of responsibility.
Well, you obviously haven't looked at the declarations of interest that were published on the council's website, which answers your question.
So she has a prejudicial interest in the low traffic neighbourhoods?
No, she has a prejudicial interest in that her husband works for Transport for London.
But she signed the portfolio holder decision that put all these things in place. This is
Can I just sorry, Paul.
What,
you vote for the
is this
London
question related to
Underground.
the item that we're looking at the moment?
Well, I'm just not clear on what basis cabinet members have responsibility for things. But
Well,
can I just ask the question?
In order not to keep the public too long, can we answer that question in writing tomorrow and explain it to you in detail? So do you have a question about the borough-wide public spaces protection?
Yeah, I just want to ask this thing, and then I don't have anything. I just want to be clear, who is the decision maker for LTNs and the street space programme?
Well, we'll explain it to you tomorrow in writing. Good. Okay. Therefore, can we agree the recommendation on page 32?
Agreed.
Yes. Agreed. Right. Move on to item 10, consolidation of fixed penalty notice for environmental crime enforcement. Councillor Palmer.
Thank you, Chair. Again, this is a renewal. This is basically what we want to do is consolidate all the fixed penalty notices that are issued for environmental reasons. So therefore, and obviously there are the fines, values, etc. as well. So what we're asking is the approval of the notices to consolidate, and also the Appendix A and the levels that we have put down, which are in line with the other boroughs as well. So it's just renewing and checking everything to bring you up to date. Thank you.
Okay, any questions or comments? I don't see any, so therefore can we agree the recommendations on page 138?
Agreed.
Agreed. Thank you. And renewal of the Edgeware Selective licensing scheme.
Okay, that's me as well.
Yes,
so again, this is again a renewal. So basically, we're asking to reintroduce the selective licensing scheme in Edgeware, which we done before previously. And this helps us to work with our private rented accommodations, with our landlords and tenants, to give better standards actually, and to deal with antisocial behaviours, I should say. There are 7 recommendations, and the reason is to address, as I've alluded to, ASBs, etc. And it helps the council as a tool as well in certain areas of the borough. Thank you.
Good. Thank you. Any questions or comments? Don't see any, therefore we'll move to agree the recommendations on page 164.
Agreed.
Agreed. Okay, item 12 is the review of housing and homelessness strategy, part 2, housing allocation schemes and tenancy strategy and policy. These are contained in the background papers that have been issued supplementary to the agenda, and Councillor Phil O'Dell is going to introduce the report.
Thank you very much, Deputy. Yeah, I would like to say thank you for all those members across other groups who took place in the cross-party working group that looked at the housing policies. This is the second part of our renewal of housing policies for Harrow. The main point of the allocations policy is that the council has decided to continue with the choice-based letting scheme as it operates, but we also need to monitor and take more robust action around people and understanding why people in high priority do not bid. The other changes being put forward within this policy relate to legislation changes through case law. As I say, we will be continuing to do the choice-based letting scheme, and also within the report there's also approval from with them in consultation with corporate director and myself around local lettings plan. Moving to the tenancy strategy, I think it was about 5 years ago we introduced the flexible fixed term tenancies. We've now reviewed that, and we now feel that there is no longer any value continuing with this, because the main thrust of that legislation, or allowing us to do that, was to deal with under occupation. The officers and myself feel that we have more robust policies to deal with under occupation, so we think that we will discontinue that of those flexible fixed term policies, not to be confused with the flexible introductory 1-year tenancies. I move that Cabinet agree these policies.
Okay, are there any questions or comments? I don't see any, therefore can we agree the recommendations on page 320?
Agreed.
And Phil, it's you again. Green Homes Grant Scheme request to utilise grant funding awarded via the lead borough of Ealing.
Yeah, thanks very much, Keith. Yeah, I'm very pleased to bring this item to Cabinet as part of our climate change strategy, following the emergency motion that Council passed. This item's come to Cabinet because of a successful bid, as you say, led by the London Borough of Ealing, and we've been awarded a grant of over £4.7 million, a total of which of over £500,000 will be used for works in Harrow. The full cost of the works will be met by the grant, and there'll be no financial implications for Harrow Council. The Council also asked Cabinet to note that we put in the second part to this bid, or phase 1B, which will have the, if successful, will need a contribution from the Council's housing revenue account, because this will affect or introduce work on council properties in relationship to retrofitting. As I say, I'm very pleased as part of our climate change strategy. I think this will be an ongoing feature of reports to housing and the Cabinet on further schemes if more green homes grants available come from the government. Thank you.
Thank you. Are there any questions or comments? In which case, can we agree the recommendations on page 494?
Agreed.
Christine, you've got your hand up.
Yeah, sorry. It was just a comment, actually. I just wanted to point out just how much hard work the housing department and the council has done during this really very difficult time, and they should be very proud of themselves. I wanted to say thank you.
Right. Thank
Thanks
you.
very much, Christine. We'll pass your comments on to the officers and staff. Thank you.
Thank you, Phil.
Okay. Right. Item 14 is very similar to item 13. It's the urgent item that was put in from the Department of Work and Pensions contract kickstart funding.
Keith, I think you've missed an item on the HRA budget update or proposals for rent increases.
It's further
Isn't
down.
That's item 17, isn't it?
Oh,
Yeah.
sorry, I thought it was 14.
Yeah.
Well,
That'd be too sensible, Phil.
No, we like to move it around and give people time to recover from their presentations. Yeah, this is very simple. It's money that we bid for by the Economic Development Unit in order to provide apprenticeships to 24-year-olds, and we have received a grant of just over £600,000 from the Department of Work and Pensions. They require the council to agree to accept the money by the 7th of February. The council cannot write to them and agree to accept the money by the 7th of February unless we now decide that we are happy to receive the £600,000 for the apprenticeship scheme. So I can't see anybody that thinks it would be a bad idea not to receive money. So can we agree the recommendations on page 512?
Absolutely.
And I'm sure Christine would say equally all the hard work that's been done by the Economic Development Unit in the in getting this money for us.
That's right, Keith. I didn't want to repeat myself, but yes, absolutely.
Good. Okay, move on to item 15, which is fees and charges for 2021-22, and that's Adam again.
Thank you very much, Deputy Leader. So this is the annual fees and charges report. We obviously have fees and charges over a whole range of different items that where the council provides services, charges, services to the public. You've seen that our general approach is to increase charges by 3% as a sort of general default, and that's a combination of inflation, which is just over 1%, and then also our efforts to move towards full cost recovery, given the council's overall financial position. But there are many areas where we haven't increased charges or in fact cut charges, including things like sports bookings for junior pitch lettings, waste collection for up to 4 items, and also pay and display parking. And I'll also draw Cabinet's attention to the fact that we are cutting the cost for businesses of licenses for outdoor tables and chairs and street trading, which are clearly becoming more important during the COVID-19 pandemic.
Good. Any questions? No. So can we agree the recommendation on page 545 and 546?
Agreed.
Agreed. Okay, and it's also, Adam, on the calculation of business rates tax base for 2021-22, and that's on a supplemental agenda.
Thank you, Deputy Leader. And so you'll see here, this is a report we use every year to calculate our business rates base. We do retain £15 million of business rates revenue, so it is a really important part of our overall revenue mix. The other thing that's key to note from this report is that we've been part of a pool for business rates across London for the past 3 years. Because of the pandemic and the challenges around the economy, it means that unfortunately the growth we've seen in past years around businesses in London is likely to go in reverse. And as a result, London Councils is recommending that the business rates pool has been discontinued. We are lobbying in partnership with other boroughs, MHCLG, to look at how we can continue to operate using that pool mechanism. But unfortunately, as it stands, it doesn't make sense to continue being part of it, and so Harrow won't be part of the London pool in the year to come. The other thing I just mentioned, obviously, there's a huge amount of activity around businesses through the business grants, pandemic business grants. But one thing that's worth drawing Cabinet's attention to is the fact that many retail businesses have been receiving rates relief for this year, but that will come to an end in March. And so retail businesses could potentially be hit by significant business rates bills from April. We're trying to use some of our discretionary grant funding to support businesses, but also lobby the government to extend some of that rate relief at a time when retail businesses are under huge pressure.
Okay, I don't see any hands up. Can we agree the recommendations on page 4 of the published supplemental agenda pack?
Agreed.
Agreed. Right. It's your turn now, Phil. Item 17, draft HRA budget and MTFS.
Thanks very much, Keith. Yeah, I'm very pleased to move this draft HRA report for Cabinet to go out to consultation, report back to the February Cabinet and the Council meeting in February. As detailed in the report, we are following the government guidelines. We are recommending that there be an increase in tenants and charges of CPI plus 0.5%. This is obviously going to be a very challenging budget because the CPI figure was actually set last July, and this was 0.5%. And the officers and we feel that this may grow over the period of this year. So it would be very challenging. Obviously, part of this report is also the draft capital budget, and there's going to be obviously increased expenditure in our building homes for Londoners and the borough, of which I'm pleased to report that 95 new homes for Harrow Council has already been built, and there are other already schemes on the ground and being developed now, like at Chichester Court and the major regeneration scheme at Grange Farm. As I said, this is a draft report. The final report will go to February and then go to full council in February as well. Thank you.
Thank you. Adam, do you have anything to add to that?
I won't add to what Phil said, he's covered it all.
Good. Okay, I don't see any hands up. So can we agree the recommendations on page 618?
Agreed.
Agreed. Good. As Adam knows, this is one of my favourite reports, Treasury Management Strategy Statement and Annual Investment Strategy for 2020-21 Mid-Year Review, and it's contained on the second supplemental agenda. So it's over to you, Adam.
It is a long-awaited report, and I can see Councillor Osborne's already got his hand up waiting to ask some questions. I might normally make some light commentary on this. I do think Councillor Osborne's question probably relates to the fact that Treasury management has become a hotter topic more recently for a variety of reasons. And I do think it's a real strength of Harrow and a tribute to Dawn, our Finance Director, and her team as well. And the report details something which is now a little bit old, but you know, we've taken out, we were in a very, very strong position, taking out some long maturity loans back in the late 2019 at low interest rates. And you can see from the report that actually those loans reduced our overall average interest rates from 3.7 to 3.3%. And also the increase the maturity or the average life of our borrowing from 31 years to 38 years. And again, that's just put us in really quite a strong position to weather the storm. But I'll take Councillor Osborne's question on the report.
Paul.
Thank you. I've always actually wanted to be able to have a question on Treasury management. I don't think anyone's ever done that before. And it's a more technical question, and I'm not sure if it actually should be reflected in this or not. But I just have a question, and maybe it's for Dawn as well. Where we borrow to buy a capital asset and that asset then loses value, is that something that should be reflected in this report and how we report on our borrowing, our Treasury management position? I'm just not sure that the capital programme is quite the right place to capture some of those things. I get that the income stream might still come from that asset, but if the asset itself that you paid a certain amount for has decreased in value, just where that gets reported within the process.
So this is getting into some technical stuff, and I'm not the expert here, and we will follow up with Dawn for sure and get back to you. But my understanding is that essentially, if we write off a portion of that asset, then that obviously hits the revenue account as you would do in a normal business, and then of course we'd also write down the element on the balance sheet, so to speak. But we'll get back to you on the technicalities around that.
Yeah, I mean, it's just we set out how much money we have in banks, how much money we have in various other investments, but we don't seem to set out in this report where we have a property portfolio, where the value of that comes. And I just think, you know, it's worth having some visibility on.
Yes, that's a good point. And again, you know, because if you think about our balance sheet, it also includes the roads and, you know, many other assets, thousands of assets across the borough. But you're right, Paul, that obviously property investments are a slightly different kettle of fish. We might think of those separately, differently.
Thank you.
But we'll get a technical response from Dawn over the next week or so. Can we note the recommendations on page 3 of the published second supplemental agenda?
Noted.
Noted.
Good. Right. And item 19, which is the calendar of meetings 2021-22, which is in the name of the leader of the council, but I think it should be in my name because I'm the portfolio holder for democratic services and legal services. I can't think of any way to introduce this other than to say that this is the calendar of meetings 2021-22. And can we agree the recommendations on page 647?
It's a very fine calendar, Deputy Leader.
Yes, I'm sure it is. Anyway, there's no other items of any urgent business, so I declare the meeting closed at 2018. Thank you all very much and enjoy the rest of your evening.
Thank you.
Thanks very much, Keith.
Bye-bye.